Hi everyone, this is the first lecture of week 12, the final week. And again, I'm going to go very fast. And so you want to do your readings from the biblical texts, as well as from Coogan, because they will appear on the quizzes, though I don't go over them in the video. Also, the video will make a lot more sense if you have done your readings beforehand. Okay. Last week, during our shortened week, we discussed the most famous ruler or rulers of the northern kingdom, that is the kingdom of Samaria, namely Ahab and Jezebel, and in particular Jezebel's interaction with one of the most famous prophets of Israel, one of the first and most famous prophets of Israel, Elijah. Okay, now in this video we are going to scoot way up in time to the point and narrative about when the north, North Israel, sometimes called Samaria or just plain Israel, when they are destroyed and when the kingdom finally comes to an end. Okay. After the time of Solomon, as I noted in a preceding video, the nation of Israel splits into two, the north and the south. And the north, because it is bigger and richer, will be destroyed about a century before the south, otherwise known as Judah, before the south is destroyed. Okay, as I noted again a couple of weeks ago, Solomon comes to the throne during a time of relative peace when larger countries, they had some issues, right, were distracted, okay, and therefore generally left the smaller countries like Israel alone, okay. After Solomon, however, these larger countries, they start really kind of gaining in power and start beginning to interfere in the affairs of smaller nations in the Levant, like that of Israel. Okay. Namely, larger countries, for example, Egypt, and this country that I'm going to talk about today, located in modern-day Iraq, called Assyria. And what they'll do after the time of Solomon is really start to try to expand their empire by bringing into the fold, like kind of satellite vassal countries. Okay, and these vassal states will pay, of course, the larger country a tribute, right, or taxes, very large taxes, right, which, as you would imagine, these smaller countries were not keen to do, right? Nobody really likes being overpowered by a larger nation and paying taxes. So, of course, what these smaller nations did is that every chance they can get, they would rebel. Okay, and this was especially the case when the larger countries, the larger kind of empirical nations, seemed a bit weak. So if a new emperor comes to the throne, this was a point at which a lot of these smaller countries would try to rebel. Okay, and this is what the North, Israel or Samaria, what they do in 722 BCE. Okay, when Assyria, their overlord, is dealing with rebellions nearby. Israel will rebel and decline to pay tribute. And at this point, the larger empire, Assyria, will decide to punish Israel for doing that. Okay, and what they'll do first is they'll lock up the northern king named Hoshea. Okay, and then subsequently the Assyrians will send an army to attack the north. And this is described in 2 Kings 17, verse 5. Okay. Then the king of Assyria invaded all the land and came to Samaria. For 3 years he besieged it. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria, and he carried the Israelites away to Assyria, and he placed them in Hala on the Habor, the river of Gozan, and in the city of the Medes. Okay, so like I said, scholars date this attack and the fall of the north, or Samaria, to 722 BCE. Okay, and after the destruction of the north, unfortunately, the 10 tribes that constitute Samaria or the north, well, they're lost. We don't really hear from them again, and they become what's known as the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Okay, and part of the reason why this happens to the north, why they essentially disappear, okay, while it doesn't happen to the south, right, in part you can get a clue from the verses that I just read. Okay, the Assyrians were particularly vicious when they attacked a country. And they had a very particular way to treat those areas and the peoples they conquered, okay, in order to make sure that there was no future possibility of a rebellion. Okay, what the Assyrians did was they would take a conquered population and forcibly relocate them, okay, to different other parts of their empire. Okay, then they would move in other conquered peoples into that generally empty country or territory. Okay, and what this did was essentially cut off the contact between people and their native lands, their territories. Okay, they were just essentially uprooted. Okay, and of course this was kind of tantamount, what we would call this kind of cultural genocide at the, in our times. Okay, and it was highly effective. Okay, and that's why you don't hear about North Israel after this point, because that uprooting and the kind of cultural decimation, it really worked. Okay, the destruction of the North was also deeply problematic theologically. Okay, so well, why? Though the North is not the South, okay, it had, of course, similar traditions based on the idea, or centered on the idea, that Yahweh, their God, had promised to protect them, make them into a numerous nation, that they would get to remain on the land promised by God to their ancestors. Okay. Hence, what the destruction did is that it kind of uprooted or put these core theological beliefs into doubt, made it seem as if they were untrue. Okay, and as a result of this kind of theological problem that the fall of the North posed, much of 2 Kings 17, which describes the fall of the North, a lot of it is spent trying to come up with theological justifications and reasons as to why God allowed the North to fall. Okay, so for example, I'm going to read parts of it. This is only a little part of what, the description in 2 Kings 17. This is verse 7 and following. This occurred because the people of Israel have sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. They had worshipped other gods and walked in the customs of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel, and in the customs of the king of Israel had introduced. The people of Israel secretly did things that were not right against the Lord their God. They built for themselves high places at all their towns, from watchtower to fortified city. They set up for themselves pillars and sacred poles on every hill and under every green tree. There they made offerings on all the high places, as the nations did, whom the Lord carried away before them. They did wicked things, provoking the Lord to anger. They served idols, of which the Lord has said, you shall not do this. And it just goes on and on. Okay, it's a big tally of all the bad things that the North was doing. Okay, and of course, with this lengthy enumeration of the North's misdeeds, what it shows was how deeply problematic the fall of the North was theologically. Okay, not just for the North. Okay, for the reasons I stated above, the fall of the North was also troubling for the South. Okay, that is Judah. Okay, why? Well, because the fall of the North, in raising the possibility that God's promises were untrue, that perhaps God was not in control as much as people hoped or thought, it basically raised the possibility that the South would be next in being destroyed. Okay, that the theological promises by God, that God promised Israel, would also be seen, or would also hold untrue for the South as well, and that therefore they too will be exiled and destroyed. Okay. And of course, this possibility that the theology was untrue, this is an even larger problem in the South because of the kind of strength of this other theology in the South, right? The presence of this other theology called either the Davidic promise or Zion theology. Okay, and this was a kind of ideology that was particular to the South, certainly stronger in the South than in the North, which did not really have a very strong sense of monarchy. Okay, that is, even more than in the North, the South had this idea that God had promised that he would dwell in the temple in Jerusalem forever, and that therefore Jerusalem would always be safe, uninvadable. Okay, and alongside that, a divine promise that a descendant from the line of David will always sit on the throne. Okay, this is, like I said in preceding videos, this is known as the Davidic promise or Zion theology. Okay, and it is this theology, right, or this promise, that really comes under threat or is threatened with the fall of the North. Okay, and hence what you get in the rest of this chapter in 2 Kings 17, as well as really in the chapters that go forward in the book of 2 Kings, are stories that try to shore up or reassert the truthfulness of this theology. Okay. So, for example, in the rest of 2 Kings 17, we are told what happens in Israel, that is the North Israel, after it is repopulated, after it is exiled and then repopulated with other conquered people from other nations. Okay, as I stated earlier, when the Assyrians conquered a country, they moved a lot of the population of that country out, right? They moved other people in. Okay. And so this is what happens in the north after new people come in to resettle. Okay, this is 2 Kings 17, verse 24 and following. The king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath, and Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria and placed the people of Israel. And they took possession of Samaria and settled in its cities. When they first settled there, they did not worship the Lord, says Yahweh. Therefore, Yahweh, the Lord, sent lions among them, which killed some of them. So the king of Assyria was told, the nation that you have carried away and placed in the cities of Samaria do not know the law of the God of the land. And therefore he has sent lions among them. They are killing them because they do not know the law of the God of the land. And then the king of Assyria commanded, send there one of the priests whom you carried away from there. Let him go and live there and teach them the law of the God of the land. So one of the priests whom they had carried away from Samaria came and lived in Bethel, and they taught them how they should worship the Lord. So we are told that other people that settle in North Israel, okay, who are not true Israelites, right? How do we know that they're not true Israelites? Well, they don't know how to worship Yahweh, the God of the land, okay? As a result, Yahweh, the God of that land, okay, sends lions, we are told, to kill these people until the Assyrian overlords find, we are told, like a random priest from the north. Okay, that is a heretical priest. I mean, that's a subtext to show these newly settled foreigners how to follow the God that runs that land. Okay, so as not to piss him off and cause him to kill them with lions. Okay, so notice the theological as well as the kind of ethnocentric message here. Okay, you find in this little story the assertion that despite the conquest and destruction of the north, Yahweh is still very much said to be in control of that land. Okay, the land of Israel will always be ruled by and managed by Yahweh, the story asserts. Okay. Notice also the further poo-pooing of the northerners. Okay, remember that the southern writers and editors always have felt that the northerners were big heretics. Okay, well, this bias will grow after the destruction of the north. And what this story, which almost certainly was either written by or edited by a southern writer, what it shows or maintains is that the northerners were not only heretics and therefore deserving of their destruction, okay, unlike the South, right? Okay, notice how this all helps to protect Southern theology, that they will not be destroyed like the North, okay? Not only does it say, oh, these Northerners, these heretics who are deserving of destruction, okay, unlike us good people in the South, but the story also takes this bad Northern person idea further by now arguing that the Northerners are not even true Israelites at all. Okay, they are instead what? They're like half-breeds, or to use like Harry Potter language, mudbloods. They're not true Israelites. They come from somewhere else. They're not true followers of Yahweh. No wonder they were destroyed. Okay. And this idea where the Southerners see the Northerners and others as not true Israelites, this reflects kind of a larger identity questions that will emerge once the North and then a century later when the South is destroyed. Okay, at that point in time when both of them are destroyed, different groups will argue as to what a true Israelite or who a true Israelite was. And one group will say, well, we're the true Israelite. And the other group will say, well, no, we're the true Israelite. Okay. And really, it is after the destruction of the North, and more so after the destruction of the South, which is coming, right, that you'll get this alongside, you'll get alongside this question of who a real Israelite is, you'll start to get alongside it this kind of heavy emphasis on endogamy and this hatred of intermarriage or exogamy. Okay, so that is, kind of understandably, once the homelands of both Israel and Judah, the North and the South, are destroyed and gone, okay, and different people exiled, that is when you can no longer say, an Israelite is somebody who lives in Israel, right? It is at that point when you can't say that anymore that this question over who an Israelite is, right? What will make up an Israelite, right? And that it becomes very important and indeed heavily argued over. Okay. This anti-Northern bias, which goes all the way back to the destruction of the North in the 8th century, which would exacerbate and add to the issue of Israelite national identity. It would be, this debate would become increasingly important, increasingly tense, and very, very, very long lasting. And the way that you can tell it's long lasting is that you can see this argument really and this bias reflected in the New Testament as well. Okay, these Northerners will be known as Samaritans or Samaritans. Okay, and later you can tell that things got so bad that the Samaritans will build their own temple and would even write their own version of the Pentateuch or Torah called the Samaritan Bible. Okay, I mean, there was a split. Okay, this is in part where you get the parable of the Good Samaritan comes from, and you really can't understand this parable until you realize this bias reflected even in the Hebrew Bible going forward, right, and continuing in time to the 1st century, this bias against Samaritans or Northerners as half-breeds and heretics, okay, which, like I said, really increase once the North falls, okay. And speaking of the Bible, or scholars speculate that the destruction of the North also kind of influenced or speeded up really the scribal activity that would result in the formation of the Hebrew Bible. Okay. A lot of scholars think that when the North is destroyed, that Northern scribes flee into the South, bringing with them their own writings and their writing traditions, okay, which, as we saw with the Joseph narrative, and a lot of the prophets are Northern, to be honest, are quite different, sound quite different with a different focus. Indeed, many scholars, including myself, think that Deuteronomy and the Deuteronomistic history actually have some pretty good evidence of showing Northern influence, okay? This kind of ethical tint to Deuteronomy and the Deuteronomistic history. Anyway, whatever, okay. Hence, scholars think that there was a flurry of scribal activity that ensued after the North was destroyed, okay, as scribes fled into the South. And that it was at this point, okay, that when the North is destroyed, that really the collecting and editing and perhaps writing of the history of Israel, especially the Deuteronomistic history, that it really starts, okay, or sort of maybe advances, okay, speeds up, okay. Certainly the destruction of the North would have served as a warning sign to the South that they may indeed be next, okay, no matter what their theology promised, okay. And as such, the writers or scribes or the elites, they probably were spurred on in their literary activities so as to ensure, to make sure that the Israelite culture would not be completely decimated or destroyed if possibly the South was destroyed, okay? What the destruction of the North hinted at, therefore, was that the South might also not survive, and that therefore the writers in these countries needed to hurry up and collect the stories, write them down, as well as the histories of their nation and their traditions before it was too late, before it is too late, okay? Indeed, as you will see in the next video, right after the destruction of the North, the South too will have a very, very close call when they are also nearly destroyed by Assyria. So, and then for that, turn to the next video.